This is Gemara Baba Basra, Daf Beis Baruch Hashem, beginning a new Masechta, and as always we begin with the Tefillah and a Bracha, that B'siyata D'Shmaya, the same excitement, enthusiasm that a Daf Beis brings with it, and Mirza Hashem, it should carry us through the whole Perek, the whole Masechta, and it should just bolster our Chazara. As we all know, every extra minute we spend looking at the daf again, hearing another shir, doing another chazara, makes worlds of a difference. And with that, we begin Daf Beis in Basra, one of the more famous parakim, Perek Hashutfim, as most call it, but as Rav Asher Eli always says, Hashutafin, Sheratzu Lasais Mechitza. Yes, they're shutfim, but the appropriate pronunciation is hashutafin, partners. Sharatza latzais mechitza, that want to make a mechitza b'chatzer, in a chatzer that they own jointly. And of course, we remind ourselves, what's a chatzer? We have houses that open up into chatzeros. Bisman Chazal, multiple houses usually shared one chatzer. If you remember way back when, from the Eruvin, from the Shabbos days, we have multiple houses open up into one central courtyard. Over here, we're going to discuss two people that they share one courtyard. We could call it an attached house with one front yard. And now they decide, Sharatza Lasais Mechitza, they want to make a mechitza, a partition, a fence. If you look at the top Rashi speaks out, we just says, partners that have a chutzner in partnership is shutvis, and the houses of the two of them are open into it, and all the chatziros sheshanu chachamov neha batin v'roiv tashmishan b'chatzer. Rashi just keys us in that the chutzner is in front of the house, number one, and the majority of their tashmish, of the usage, was in their chutzner. So what do? The partners who agreed to make a mechitza, boinin es ha'koisel be'emsa, they build the fence, the wall, in the middle between the two properties. Continues the Mishnah. What type of wall? How do you build it? Says the Mishnah. Makom shenagu livnais givil, in a place in which the custom, the minhag, is to build with givil, rough edge stones, gazis, smooth stones, kfitzin, half-sized bricks, levainin, full-sized bricks, bainin. Everything in accordance to that which the custom, the minhag of each place, that is the type of fence that you build. As the Mishnah so eloquently coins on the third line, ha'kol kefinag keminag ha'medina. Continues the Mishnah. We listed gvil, gazis, kfitzin, leveinim. Says the Mishnah, what is gvil? Zen noisim gimel tvachim, v'zen noisim gimel tvachim. A wall of gvil, a wall of rush and stones, requires a 6 tvachim. So each partner, each house has to provide 3 tvachim for the fence, 3 from each is 6. Begazis, smooth stones, then it's a little bit smaller. Each one has to give 2.5 tfachim, as a gazis, a smooth stoned wall, is 5 tfachim wide. Bikfitzim, if you're using half-size bricks, even smaller. Each one gives 2 tfachim. Bileveinim, full-size bricks, we can anticipate almost what this is. And therefore, says the Mishnah, lefikach, therefore, since each partner could tell and reinforce the other, as Rashi puts in the missing words, therefore, continues the Mishnah, if the wall falls down, the place, and the stones, shel shnei hem, belongs to both of them. And as Rashi continues and speaks out, then neither of them, it's in my yard and they're my stones, even if he has a chazakah more than his friends. And for example, the wall falls into his possession, as the Gemara will explain in 2 days. But no, because the wall is supposed to be built lahalacha, be'emsa, as the Mishnah spoke about. Therefore, the place in the wall belongs to both of them. Continues the Mishnah, that was the din of hashutfim or hashutafim, that build a wall in partnership. Continues the Mishnah of achein begina, and similarly, if they have a joint ownership in a garden, a vegetable garden, again, makshanagu ligdar, in a place in which the custom is to make a gedera, a partition between the gardens, mechayv and isai, they are obligated. Aval, however, bebika in a valley, makom shenagu sheloy ligdar, then ein mechayv and isai. Elohim ratzu, rather if they want, koines l'toich sheloy ubayne. In a place where the custom is not to build, you can't force your neighbor in the valley to build. So what could you do? You could pull it into your possession and build a fence in your property. And you make a sign on the outside. What is the sign? What is this chazis? To tell everyone, as the last Rashi in the Mishnah points out, lo idea, to make it known, sheshneim asua. That was incorrect. I'm pardon on that Rashi. That Rashi is in a bit. In this case, we say we make a chazis to show that you are the owner. Lefikach, therefore, concludes the Mishnah, as you built the wall by yourself. However, if you made the wall with the knowledge of both of them, then you make the wall in the middle. That was the Rashi we just read, and you make a sign mikan umekan from both sides, letting everyone know that even though there was not an obligation to make the fence, however, this is what was done, is that they made it together. And therefore, concludes the Mishnah, on such a scenario, lafikach, im nafal ha'kaisel, if the wall were to fall, hamakim v'havanim, shel shnehem, then the wall and the stones belong to both of them, because that is exactly what the sign dictates, that indeed they built such a wall with joint ownership. So, if we were to sum up the entirety of the Mishnah, we are dealing with how and when walls are built between properties, etc. Good fences make good neighbors. Says the Gemara, Savrua, the Chachamim thought, my mechitza. The Mishnah began that taught us that partners that want to make a mechitza. Says the Gemara, they thought they know what a mechitza is, a guda, a wall. Kedetanya, as we learned in a brisa, or Rashi had the gears of Kedetanan, mechitza zakaren shenifritza, a partition of a vineyard that was breached. Omer lai, the owner of the field, can say to the owner of the vineyard, Gadur, make the fence back. Again, if Reuven has Shimon make a kerem in his property, and then the fence falls, so Reuven says, rebuild your fence. Chazra, if he rebuilds it, and again it's breached, Amar Loi, again, the owner can tell him, Gadur, rebuild the wall. We move over to Beis Amid Beis, Nit Yayei Sheimanu, Veloy Gadra. Let's say the owner of the vineyard said, this is enough, this is ridiculous, I give up, I'm not going to sit here and build a wall on infinitum, and he just abandons ship. He's nityayish, he despairs over the whole story, and he does not rebuild the wall. What is the halacha? Harei zeh kidesh. Then the vineyard is kidesh, it is unfit. Why is it unfit? Because we have a situation of kilayim. As the Tab Rashi points out, Kiddush HaTavua, Im Ha'isiv Masayim. As we're going to see, we have a vineyard in the middle of a field. That's the reason. Now we get a deeper explanation. Reuven owned the field of grain. Shimon puts a vineyard smack in the middle of his field. Says Reuven, your fence fell. Please go rebuild it. He rebuilds it. It falls again. Rebuild it. It falls again. He says, Shimon says, I'm out of here. Okay, but guess what? Now Reuven's grain is a problem. He's like Kidesh. It is unfit because we have a situation of Kelayim. V'chayev b'achri yusai, and the Shimon, the owner of the vineyard, is responsible for any loss that it concurs, that happens from the fact that he did not rebuild the fence. So what do we see? We see, first of all, and the reason why we're bringing down this Mishnah is because we see a translation. We see that a mechitza is a guda. Says the Gemara back into dealing with our Mishnah. Sounds like in our Mishnah, Taima Deratzu, that they concurred, they agreed to build a wall. Halei if they were not agreeable to build the wall, then it seems Ein Mechayvin Oisai. We do not obligate the other one to build a wall. Alma. So from here we could prove, and this begins the sugya, Hezik Re'iyah Lav Shmei Hezik. Reuven and Shimon have a house with a joint chutzner. Reuven says, let's build a fence. Shimon says, I'm not interested. It sounds like from the Mishnah, we cannot compel Shimon to build that fence. Why not? Reuven says, I'm being damaged. How are you being damaged? Seemingly the damage that Reuven is incurring, that Shimon is looking into his chutzner. Hezik Re'iyah, you're looking at my stuff. Seemingly from the Mishnah, we can prove that Hezik Re'iyah is not considered Hezik. Asks the Gemara on the fourth line, 1 second. Ve'ema mechitza. Ve'ema, or my mechitza, is pelukta. Maybe it doesn't actually mean a proper fence. Maybe it just means to divide up the property, k'dechsev, as we find in a pasuk in Bamidbar, v'atehi mechitza ha'eda. And it was the partition of the Eda, and clearly over there, all it meant was a division. And therefore, what would now the implication in the Mishnah be? A totally different implication. You translate one word differently, the whole din switches. The implication now would be v'kimun deratzu, if they want, we could build a fence against their will. Alma, so what do we see now? Hazik re'iyah, shemei hazik. We see that once they agree to divide, now we see a totally new explanation. It's not whether they agree to actually make the Gouda, the wall. No, they're agreeable to divide it. We have my yard and your yard. You don't have to actually agree to build the fence. Agreeing to divide the property is enough, and then I could, yes, compel you to build the fence. Now we have the exact opposite. Raya Hezik Re'iyah is indeed considered Hezik. Says the Gemara, Yachi, if what you're saying is true, that the word mechitza just means to divide, Hai Sharatzu Laseis Mechitza, the wordage in the Mishnah is off. Why does the Mishnah say that they agree their Ratzu Laseis Mechitza? What should the Mishnah have said? Sharatzu Lachatzois Mi Ba'ilei. The Mishnah should have said that they're agreeable Lachatzois to divide. What's Ratzu Las? It's off. It doesn't mean they actually wanted to make a partition. Just means they agreed to divide the property. Based on this question, says the Gemara, you're right. Elamai Guda. So let's go back. It must be that the mechitza is indeed a wall. But then, Bainin is like Kaisel, Bainin Aisaimi Baile. Now, either way, we have a problem with the Mishnah, because the Mishnah continues and build the wall. What do you mean build the wall? The topic of discussion is the wall. So, of course, you build the wall. What should the Mishnah have just said? Bainin Aisai. Answers the Gemara, Itana Aisai. Hava Amina. You know what I would have thought? B'misibas ba'alma. I would have thought you just make a boundary mark. You don't have to actually properly erect a wall. Kamash malan kaisel, that we indeed build a wall. But at the end of the story, we do not have a raya whether Hezik Re'iyah is Shemei Hezik, is not Shemei Hezik. We had rayas back and forth. A topic that B'siyata D'Shmaya we'll come back to in 2 months' time. So we continue about 10 lines down. The 2 dots, it says the Gemara, Bainin es ha'kaisel be'emsa. You build the wall in the middle of the property of a chulu, says the Gemara, Pshita. What's the chiddush to this? Of course, 2 people agree to make a wall. Of course, you put it in the middle. Says the Gemara, you know what the chiddush is? Lo yitzricha, we need the din in the Mishnah to teach us that what? They called him chad, that one person came, v'ritzaye lechavre. And you know what happened? And he said to his friend that he wants to make such a situation on his own. So Ma'u the Tema, I would think Matzi Amarle, he could say back to him, Ki Yisratzai Lecha, when did I agree to you? Ba'avira, I agreed to you with regard to the view, but Bitashmishta Lo Yisratzai, with regard to using my courtyard, I never agreed to you, Yisratzai Lach. Kamash Malan, therefore the Mishnah teaches us that once he agreed to build a wall, you have to give the land. Meaning, the whole question was that it's Pashit, answers the Gemara that in a case where Reuven and Shimon are discussing putting up this partition and Shimon is maskim, maybe Shimon could say, I'm only maskim that I don't want you looking into my property, I don't want to be looking into your property. But my haskama never was with the intent to actually, give part of my land for the building. Kamash on the Mishnah that you have to give the land. So goes and says the Gemara back to that which we said. The Hezik Re'iyah, Lav Shmei Hezik. Is there someone to hold that Hezik Re'iyah, Lav Shmei Hezik? And now the Gemara continues with numerous rayos. What exactly is going on in the world of Hezik Re'iyah? We said we're going to come back to this in 2 months' time, but we have a slight, let's let the Gemara develop itself. Says the Gemara, the first raya is going to be for the next case in the Mishnah. Tashema, v'chein begina. The same din applies to a gina, to a garden. So what do we see? That if we deal with the same din by a garden, seemingly, we do hold that Hezik Re'iyah is indeed Hezik, that by a garden as well, we could compel the other to build a wall. Says the Gemara, no, what raya, you know why? Gina shiny kid Rav Abba. That what? The Amar Rav Abba, Amar Ravuna, Amar Rav. Aser la'amdam la'amoid b'sadach aveiro b'shashehi oimedes b'koi moiseha. One is not allowed to stand in his friend's field while there is crops there. Why? Because of ayin hara. And that's the reason why you can't do it. But not necessarily do we have a raya with regard to Hezik Re'iyah. No, it's a din in ayin hara. That's the reason why you build a fence. Says the Gemara, 1 second, nice pshat. But v'chein katani, it says v'chein, that the same din in the reisha of building a fence between in a courtyard between two properties is the din over here in the garden. Says the Gemara, no problem. Agvil v'gazis, the v'chein is going in the materials, but not necessarily on the din of Hezik. Continues the Gemara, Tashema. Let's try to bring another raya that Hezik Re'iyah is indeed a Hezik. Koisel chatzer shenav v'chayim nice. If a wall in a chutzner falls down, we obligate him to rebuild it. Ad dalid amos. You have to rebuild it up until the height of 4 amos. Now, why 4 amos? Seemingly, the reason is so that you cannot see into the other person's yard. Says the Gemara, no. Nafel shiny. It's only because there was a fence. Now you're rebuilding a fence. That's why we require you to build it up to Dalit Amay. Says the Gemara, that's quite obvious. With the Karila, my Karila, what was your Havamina? Why do we have a Havamina that the fact you have to build it to 4 Amay shows something about Hezik Re'iyah? Says the Gemara, you know why? Seifa tzrich alei midalit amos ulamala ein mechayvin oisai, that above 4 amos we do not obligate him to build it, even though the original wall was indeed larger. But you only have to build it up until 4 amos, and therefore that's the chiddush. But we have no raya about Hezik Re'iyah. Tashema raya number 3. Kovnos alivnos beishar v'deles lechatzir. Says the Mishnah later on that we force 2 people that own a courtyard together. They have to pay for the beishar, the gatehouse, v'deles, the door, lechatzir. What do we see? Shramina Hezik Re'iyah Shmei Hezik, that if we're going to force you to build these items, must be because you want to make sure no one looks into the other field. Says the Gemara, no, Hezika deraibim shiny. That was a case of the rabbim. Says the Gemara, Yachid Lai. Really, there's no raya from a Yachid Tashema. Ein cholzin as a chatzah ashiva dalal amos lazeh v'dalal amos lazeh. We're not allowed to divide a chatzah until there's going to be 4 amos to each. Hayesh b'kdei lazeh u'kdei lazeh. Cholkin. My love, what does it mean that we're cholkin? Suggests the Gemara 10 lines at the bottom. B'kaisel. And if you're putting up a kaisel again, Araya Hezek Riyah Shmei Hezek. Says the Gemara, no, Raya Loi, but Mesipas just means with a boundary marker, Ba'alma. Tashima, the Gemara continues trying to prove about Hezek Riyah that it is indeed, yes, Shmei Hezek. I apologize, I said before, we're going to come back to, that's on the flip side. Hezek Riyah Loi Shmei Hezek, that will come back. I was actually just peeking, I apologize. Shouldn't cheat, I guess. So the top Maseres Hashas that says Nun Testament Beis, that was where the original Raya of Hezek Riyah came from. But now Tashema, fifth Raya, first word on the line is Hachaloi Nois. Windows, it says the Mishnah, Bein Mamala, Bein Mamata, Bein Mikenegdam Dalid Amos. One who puts up a wall in the Chutzner, opposite the windows of his neighbor, Bein Melmala, he has to make sure that either it's above or below or opposite an Arba Amos. You can't have less than 4 Amos between your neighbor's window and your wall. V'tani alon, we learned on this, milmalon, if it's above, you know how high it has to be. Kadesh lo yatzis v'yira milamaton. Must be that you cannot lower yourself from atop the wall and peek over into your neighbor's windows. Kadesh lo yira v'yira mikenegdon. So that you won't be able to see, milmaton, underneath, is so that what? Kadesh lo yamad v'yira mikenegdon. If you stand on top of the wall and you look over, you're going to see his windows. I keep on reading this wrong. One more time. Milmata kadesh lo yamad v'yira. Mikenegdon kadesh lo ya'apil. What does it mean, mikenegdon? So that you won't darken your neighbor's home. But what do we see clearly? We see that Hezek Riyah. We have to make a scenario that I cannot look into your windows. Answers the Gemara, Hazeka the Bai is shiny. We've been discussing how did this whole sugya begin. Hashu Tafan, that are building a wall between two Chatzeiros, and from there we wanted to suggest whether there's a Hezek Riyah. Says the Gemara, this Mishnah is no Raya. This is a house. The level of hezek, of being able to look into your neighbor's window, is different than looking in a chutzner. Therefore, we can't bring a raya from here. One last raya number 6. Tashima, 6 lines to the bottom, Beizim and Beis. Damer Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, Gag, or roof, asam l'chutzner, it's near a chutzner, chaveir of your friend. Oislei maka gavoya dalit amois. You have to make a fence that for amos is tall. Seemingly why? Because now when you're going to be on your roof, if 4 amos tall, you won't be able to see over into your neighbor's courtyard. Again, a raya hezek riyah, sight, looking in your neighbor's courtyard is hezek. Says the Gemara, no raya shiny hasam. You know why? Because the amar lei caused the person in the courtyard, balachatzer, the balachatzer, could say lebal hagag, to he on the roof, ledidi kvia litashmishi. My courtyard is for regular uses. Ledidach, for you, the roof. Look, it's not regular use. A roof is a lower level of usage than a chatzar, and therefore v'lo yadina. And therefore, I did not know when salika dva'asis. I never know when you're going to be there. And then we move over to Gimel and Aleph. Tana minach, so that I could hide from you. And because the guy in the courtyard Ketaina, I never know. You're on a roof. How could I ever know? That's why you have to build a high wall, but not necessarily would it be a raya to a regular case of hezek riyah in a courtyard. 6 potential rayas, nothing standing, and we'll pick it up from Lishna Achrina B'siyata Dishmaya.